crisis cannot stop the cross. When the future is uncertain, we do not lean on our own understanding, for He is our ever-present help in times of trouble. Though the earth may tremble and the mountains fall into the sea, we do not fear, because He is the rock of our salvation. And when crisis knocks at our door, and the things of earth are like dust in the wind, we stand firm, believing in the promise that we rest safely in His hands. For this is why He came, why He lived, and why He died, that we might have life and have it more abundantly, and take comfort in the knowledge that He is our King. Because we know that when all seemed lost and death thought it had won, crisis could not stop the cross.
I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Heaven comes to fight for me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. I raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness flee. I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. I raise a hallelujah. Fear, you lost your hold on me. And I'm gonna sing in the wanna hear my praises roar up from the ashes. Hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive.
Hey everyone, good morning again, and good to be back with you, even though we're doing it a little bit different. It looks like just in some of the reports that have kind of came out, we probably will be doing it this way, at least until maybe the second Sunday of May. Possibility then. Could meet, but we'll just have to see what happens. Of course, we have to, still abide to the guidance that has been given by our government, whether it be national or state. We just got started here, and we had to start it over again because I coughed and Jason ran out the back door. And we're getting a little jumpy, aren't we, folks, as we think about everything going on. We'll probably still be that way for a little while, even after they open things back up and allow us to be more out in the public, I guess you would say. It's kind of bad when your highlight of your week or highlight of your day is when Louis, the UPS man, shows up at your door and you get to go out and meet him and get your package. We think about life right now. We think about the diversities in life and how things have just changed for us quite a bit. No matter where we're at or what we're doing, things have definitely changed, and they are not as normal as they was one time. But I think sometimes we have to take a look at, how are we going to look at those diversities? How are we going to handle those things? Are we going to look at it from more of a positive side, or are we going to look at it from more of a negative side? I never will forget one time we were sitting in the office there at Winston, and just some of the guys who were sitting there visiting in Mr. Yost's office, and Mr. Bridgman, Dan Bridgman, called in and said over the radio, he was one of the bus drivers and a teacher there also, and he said, hey, I need some help. I'm not stuck, I just can't move. That's a little bit different way of looking at it. If you're stuck, that's a lot worse off than just being able not to move. And of course, Mr. Burns got on the radio and said, sounds to me like you're stuck, Dan. But, once again, how do we look at things? Are we stuck, or is it just we can't move right now? We think about normality. We think about people talk about normal again. People talk about the new normal and what's going to happen and what's going to go on. If you look at the definition of normality, and which normality is a behavior, and normal is also used to describe individual behavior that conforms to the most common behavior in society, known as conformity. Definitions of normality vary by person, they vary by time, they vary by place, and they vary by situation. It changes along with changing societal standards and norms. No matter what, no doubt about it, what was considered normal years ago may not be considered normal now. What's considered normal now in our society years ago may have not been considered normal. And of course, I think one of the questions that we're all asking, and one of the questions that we want to ask the people out there that are, giving us suggestions, whether it be from the president's team or the governor's team and so forth, when is this going to end? And what are we to do when it seems like something is never going to end? See, in times when life becomes very tough, and times even besides what's going on now with the virus that just spread across our world, there's other times when it seems things are going on in our lives and there's just no way out. What do we do? What do we do when we hit those times? Do we run? Do we quit? Do we give up? Do we give in? Do we become jealous? Do we become angry? Do we start drinking? Do we start comparing ourselves to other people? And I think there's 3 questions that we probably ask when we get in those tough situations in life. And one of those questions might be, are we ever going to be happy again? Nothing good can come from this, can it? And even sometimes we may get to the point to where we say, what's the use of continuing? What's the use in going on? One of the things that I want us to remember as we look at normal again is that God is never absent. God is never absent no matter what is going on. We want to be assured, I think, as we go through times like this, that God cares. And we want to be able to feel His presence. But I think sometimes, if we're truthful, there's probably times in our lives when the presence of God may be the last thing that we want to be aware of. So we sometimes are not sure I want God here or right now. And why doesn't God show up and take care of the situation that's going on in our lives? This morning we're going to look at 2 stories there in the Scriptures, there in the New Testament. And it will seem that in these 2 stories that God has abandoned 2 of His favorite people. But you see, this wasn't true. He had not abandoned His favorite people. He was doing His work. He was working. See, we may not like our situation. We may not like the situation that we're dealing with right now. But see, we can't give up hope that God is with us, that God is aware, and God is not punishing us for some unknown sin through all of this. In Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, it says, when John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? A little background here. Herod of Antipas of Galilee had paid a visit to his brother in Rome. And during that visit, he actually seduced his brother's wife. He came home again. He dismissed his own wife, or divorced her, or separated from her. He married the sister-in-law whom he had lured away from her husband. Publicly and sternly, John rebuked Herod. And it was never safe to rebuke someone like Herod. And of course, Herod took his revenge. And John was thrown into the dungeons of a fortress near the Dead Sea. Now remember, John was probably one of Jesus' favorites. Their mothers, Mary and Elizabeth, were good friends. Jesus once said, he, John, is the greatest ever. But yet in Matthew 4, verses 12 through 13, it says, when Jesus heard that John had been put in prison, he withdrew to Galilee. Leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum. As we think about the situation here that John is in, as we think about what would we want Jesus to do? Well, I think we would want Jesus to go visit and to bust him out of jail. Or to send angels to rescue him when he found out that John was in prison. But it's interesting as we look at these verses, if we look at there in 12 and 13, it says Jesus went in the opposite direction. So John is in prison, and Jesus, in a sense, is living by the lake because he's up around Capernaum. John has probably been in prison for over a year, and he gets the message from Jesus about all that he's done, about everything he's done for everyone but John. In Matthew 11, verse 6, Jesus makes this following statement: "Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." That word stumble literally means like tripped up or offended. So what is Jesus talking about here when he says those words? I think he's saying there's going to be times in our lives, just like right now that we're going through, that we just don't understand what's going on. It just doesn't seem to make any sense. You hear this take, you hear this take, you hear this doctor talk, you hear this doctor talk. You hear this governor say this, and this governor says this. And we just don't know some days how to make any sense of everything. Charles Spurgeon says this: "Blessed is he who can be left in prison, can be silenced in his testimony, can seem to be deserted of his Lord, and yet can shut out every doubt." John speedily regained this blessedness and fully recovered his serenity. Blessed are the people that continue to trust and believe amidst the tough times. See, they don't interrupt silence or don't interpret silence with absence. Throughout all of this, I'm sure there's been days that we just think, where are you at, God? Where are you at in all this situation that's going on? But don't interpret silence with God being absent. Another story that goes along with what we're talking about this morning is the story of Lazarus. And there in John chapter 11, it says a man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. And this was the same Mary who massaged the Lord's feet with aromatic oils and then wiped them with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So the sister sent word to Jesus, "Master, the one you love so very much is sick." Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. But oddly, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed on where he was for 2 more days. And after the 2 days, he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." And when Jesus got the message, he said, "This sickness is not fatal. It will become an occasion to show God's glory by glorifying God's Son." There in verse 3, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Lazarus was a close friend of Jesus. Of course, he was the brother of Mary and Martha. And as we think about that story, and my mind wants to go, okay, Jesus, when you heard this, you should have just dropped everything and went immediately But Jesus didn't do that. He waited 2 days. In verses 5 and 6, it says now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And as we finish, think about that story as it goes on. Jesus did go back. And Jesus did arrive there. And the sisters, were a little put out. Jesus, if you'd have been here 2 or 3 days ago, this wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have died. And we know that Jesus went to the tomb, even though the sisters said, hey, you probably don't want to do this, because he's been dead for 2 or 3 days. But Jesus called Lazarus out, and Lazarus was brought back to life. And Jesus used that situation, I think, to really make a point. And I think Jesus uses a lot of times in our lives where we're going through some tough times to really make points in people's lives. You see, through what's going on now, God is not angry at us. That's not why the coronavirus has spread. It's not because God looked down and got mad and said, okay, people, here you go. No. It may seem that God is absent at times, but he's not absence. Not absent, it's just silence. So as we think about these 2 stories of John, and we think about Lazarus, we say, Jesus, as soon as you heard about John, you should have went there and got him out of jail. You should have sent angels and broke him out and just released him. Or when you heard about Lazarus, you should have went right then. Because if you'd have went right then, Lazarus wouldn't have died. But as we think about these days, there's 3 things. There's 3 things that I think that are not true. And one of those things is, I'll never be happy again. Folks, we will be happy again. Another thing that's not true, nothing good can come from this. Folks, I think there's already a lot of good things that's come from this, through all of the bad things that have happened. And another thing that's not true is there's no point in going on. Folks, there is a point in going on. See, we begin to lose hope at times. We begin to lose joy. We begin to lose purpose when things are just in an uproar in our lives. But there's no need to lose hope, no need to lose joy, no need to lose purpose. Because God has not forgot us, and God has not left us. See, we are dealing with some circumstances right now, but there is no proof anywhere that God has deserted us. They're just circumstances in our lives. So you see, over the next few weeks, as maybe we reach a time in our country and in our states that we can begin to kind of go back to that normal again. So over the next few weeks, we can be happy. Something good is going to come out of all of this. And there's a purpose to the pain that we've gone through. Just as there was a purpose to the pain that John went through, and that Lazarus and Mary and Martha went through. God was still in control. And God is still in control today. God still holds the whole world in his hands. He made it. He formed it. He still holds the whole world in his hand, despite all the circumstances that may be going on. So let's remember, we can be happy. Something good is going to come out of all of this. And there's a purpose to the pain and the derailment of life that we've kind of had to go through. Let us pray. Father God, we just thank you for this morning. We thank you for this message. And Father, as we think about the story of John, the story of Lazarus, and Father, may we see that throughout all the difficult times in life, you're not gone. You're not absent. But you're there. You may be silent, but you're there. And God, I thank you that you still hold the world in your hands. I thank you for what you have done through doctors and nurses and other people in leadership positions throughout all of this, because you created them. You gave them the ability to do what they do, to save people's lives and to help people to get better. And you gave people that role of leadership. And Father, I thank you so much for that. Your presence is there. We thank you. And we give you praise for what you're going to do. In Jesus' name, amen. So be happy as we go through the next few weeks. Continue to be happy. Even though we're not here in together and worshiping together, we still can worship together even though we're not in close proximity to each other. Once again, if you need anything, get in touch with us and let us know. We're just looking forward to that time that we can get back into this building here at Hopewell. Because it's pretty lonely here with just me and Jason, I can tell you that. Thank you once again. We'll see you next week. Take care. God bless.
He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the little bitty baby in his hands. He's got the little bitty baby in his hands. He's got the little bitty baby in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, right in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got everybody here right in his hand. He's got everybody here right in his hand. He's got everybody here right in his hand. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole the whole